The fourth generation of Monster Hunter. Oh my goodness, and what a generation it was. This video I'm going to be talking about both Monster Hunter 4 and Monster Hunter 4U. In the West, we did not get Monster Hunter 4, so I figured it'd just be a little easier for me to talk about both of these games together as a whole, and it's not like a separate game like Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. So with that being said, buckle up, there's a lot of information to cover, and this is going to be probably one of the longer videos in the history series. With Monster Hunter 4, we got so many new features. We got multiple new weapons. We got the ability to mount monsters. We got jumping attacks. We got weapon augments. We got a brand new story and even new quest types and more. Monster Hunter 4 is a banger, so let's get into it. This game was so many people's first introduction to the Monster Hunter series. And honestly, this game has so much going for it. They changed a ton this generation, making things more fun and much more accessible. The game had a massive change to it in the respect that the combat was much more focused on verticality than anything else. In previous games, you could climb, but not to the same degree they wanted to focus on in this entry. More things are climbable and not just cliffs. You can climb on icicles, stalactites, vines hanging down. You can even climb on monsters. That's right. This is the first game that you can actually mount a monster and topple it. They moved away from the underwater combat that was in 3 and 3U. They focused on making the gameplay with the weapons more fun by giving them all new attacks and also improved the environmental interaction throughout the world. Originally released on September 14th, 2013 in Japan, and the G-Rank version was later released on the 11th of October 2014. Monster Hunter 4U, the G-Rank version, made it to North America February 13, 2015. The original game, Monster Hunter 4, actually never made it to the West with a localization. Instead, the team at Capcom wanted to focus on the G-Rank version of the game before releasing it to the West. This was also a smart move and led to major sales for Monster Hunter 4U. This was most likely due to how much it costs to localize a game. Unfortunately for fans of the West, the Monster Hunter craze had not caught on, and the sales in the West were never quite as good as they were in Japan. So, the localization team for Monster Hunter 4U started localizing the same time that the game was being developed. Localization team director Andrew Alfonso made the decision to handle the translation of the game a little differently this time around than in previous titles. He wanted to start from the ground up and make sure things were much easier to understand and simpler to read. For example, changing an item that read Strong Deora Wing to Deora Fell Wing. Just a little bit easier to comprehend the meaning, and knowing where the item sits as far as rarity and what rank the item is. It's just a little bit easier to understand. Monster Hunter 4U was being translated at the same time that it was being made. So after Monster Hunter 4 was completely finished, devs at Capcom started making Monster Hunter 4U, and at the time that Monster Hunter 4U started being made, the localization was happening at the exact same time. Andrew Alfonso in an interview said, "This made the middle of our development a bit busier than usual because we had to take care of updates for the Japanese version while still working on new content." His team actually did more than just localization for the game. They helped improve things like the UI and tutorial features for new and returning players. They requested better tutorials for armor sets and skills for the new players, but also adding the option of skipping the tutorials for returning players. Also, small changes like more supply items during quests, and if you're in a desert, for instance, they give you hot drinks just in case you forgot them. That helps a lot of the new players, just in case they don't really understand the mechanics of the fact that you need certain items in certain environments. But it also helps old players, because if you just forget an item, it's very nice that it's there and you don't have to quit and restart the quest. The goal of these games were to make the series feel more accessible and easier to start as a new player. The director of the game, Kaname, wanted to make the game more intuitive and easier to pick up and start playing from the beginning. This also included trimming down the amount of important text that a player would have to read. While still keeping plenty of dialogue, it gave players options to either read it all or skip to the important information. This game had an enormous amount of text. Andrew Alfonso actually mentions in one of his blog posts that the Monster Hunter games have more text than games like the Ace Attorney series or even a game like Dragon's Dogma. That's a lot of text. Monster Hunter 4 is the first game that felt like it really had a story. They went with the story-based idea in Monster Hunter Tri, and it did well, but it still felt like the old games, where the focus was not really on the story. This time around, they really wanted to make the progression feel more significant, so story was important in making that happen. You, the hunter, join up with a traveling caravan that takes you to different villages and places in the world to interact with. That way, when you find a new area to fight monsters, it seems to make a little more sense with the story, because you just got to a new village, and that village will have different locales, and different areas, and different monsters. The basic story is you're a hunter that joins with a traveling caravan. Your first stop is Valhabar. You take on a few monsters, help the locals here, and eventually you'll find yourself moving on to other villages, taking on bigger and badder monsters. You start your journey in Valhabar, an oasis in the desert, a perfect starting area. Then you make your way to a village known as Hearth. It's an underground village, and it is operated by a tribe of people known as the Trovarians. Your next stop along your journey, you find yourself on an island called Chico Sands. It's all run by cats. So, who wouldn't want to be on that island, right? Then you find yourself in the beautiful village of Cathar. This village is on top of mountains, and all of the people in the village are Wyverians. Throughout the game, you're defending these villages from monster attacks, while also investigating a virus that seems to be plaguing the monsters of these areas. This is actually the last village that you visit in the story of Monster Hunter 4. But in Monster Hunter 4U, the story continues, and you actually go back to a familiar area that we've been to before, the city of Dundorma from Monster Hunter DOS. While doing research for Monster Hunter 4 and 4U, I actually came across Andrew Alfonso's blog posts on his journey through translating these games. Many of the posts were extremely interesting and actually led to some insight on why they named each of the villages the names that they gave them. I'm going to highlight a few of those here because I just think they're very interesting to know. So let's talk about the names of each village and how they landed on those names. Valhabar was originally going to be called Balbary, Valvar, Valbar, or Barbary. Eventually, they landed on Valhabar. The next village is Hearth, which in Japanese is Naguri, meaning striking things. So basically, the village of the Hammering Bros. Sorry. They changed the name to Hearth to still kind of represent the feeling of something being forged, because, you know, you strike things when you forge. I'll stop. Like we discussed earlier, the next settlement is called Chico Sands, which was named Chico after a fruit called Sapodilla. But in other countries, it is called Chico. They changed the spelling and added Sands because it was not really a village or a town. So they landed on Chico Sands. At Chico Sands, there is an area called Sunsnug Isle, which is the center for all of your palicos. They can rest up when not in use, and you can even train palicos of your choice. There's also a casting machine that will let you cast fish and maybe even catch a plesioth. There are also the Meowster Hunters, which is a minigame for palicos only, where you can send a group of your palicos on a hunt to gather materials and scraps that can be used to forge new palico equipment. The name for Sunsnug in Japanese is Poka Poka, which means warmth throughout your body. And Poka Poka Shite Kaiteki means snug as a bug in a rug. So I guess it looked very snuggly, and they went with Sunsnug Isle. Then moving on to the Wyverian village, Cathar. Here you have access to most things in other villages, but you actually have a melder here, where you can meld old talismans with frenzy crystals and get even better talismans. It's all RNG, so best of luck. Anyway, the city was named Cathar after the English word catharsis. In Japanese, the village was named Shinato, and one meaning for Shinato no Kaze is a wind that wipes away sin and filth. So catharsis is an appropriate name, and then it was shortened to Cathar. In the G-rank version of the game, you actually get to make your way back home to Dundorma, which is a city from Monster Hunter DOS and has all the necessities for G-rank hunts, although it is not as large as it was in Monster Hunter DOS. In Monster Hunter Freedom 2 and Monster Hunter Freedom Unite, the town was known as Dondruma. And when the English localization team had their chance, they actually talked about it and decided that they wanted to change the name to more reflect the Japanese original version of the name. So it used to be called Dondruma, didn't sound very much like the Japanese name, which is Dondolma. So they changed it to Dundorma to more sonically match the original Japanese name. When Monster Hunter 4 originally released in Japan, it was met with huge success. The game sold more than 1.8 million copies in the first 2 days after it came out. By the end of 2013, it had sold almost 4 million copies, which doubled any other game in that region other than Pokemon X and Y. Monster Hunter 4G sold 1.6 million in 2 days, which was a huge success if that many people who bought the first game also wanted to just get the G-rank expansion of the game. In North America, 4U sold almost 300,000 units in the first month of sales, which was the best-selling Monster Hunter game at that time in the West. As of April 2015, it had passed the 1 million mark overseas, which means North America and Europe included. And by October 2015, the game sold over 4 million units worldwide. This is the game that made things really spark outside of Japan. Obviously, Monster Hunter World played a much bigger role in cultivating new players that have never seen the series before, but this game is the spark that ignited the flame that is Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter is a series that keeps pushing technology forward. When Monster Hunter 4U came out in North America, it was also followed by the release of the new 3DS XL, which utilized all that power and extra buttons and additional joystick nub, which was featured on the new 3DS. The new 3DS actually had a higher frame rate than the old 3DS, which was a nice added benefit as well, just because it had a better processor and a little bit more RAM. Not only did this game take huge strides in single-player aspect with the story and gameplay, but they did a huge overhaul of the game's multiplayer on the handhelds and gave the 3DS its own means of connecting to other hunters and playing truly online with whomever. Previous games were only local play with ad hoc. So now with the 3DS, you don't need a new 3DS, just the 3DS, you can play online with any other hunter across the world. Of course, not Japanese hunters, but any other hunter because they're regional. This opened up online play and was the beginning of an absolute beautiful start of Monster Hunter reaching even more people and being more fun, because Monster Hunter is more fun online. Let's face it. All right, let's move on to just some small facts about the game. They added a free camera, finally, so you're not restricted to certain vertical viewing angles. They had a huge emphasis on verticality in this game, so there was a lot of climbing and platforming, which was a really big part of Monster Hunter 4. You can now even dash climb, and climbing is just faster in general. You can also even use items while you're climbing, and hallelujah, you can carry eggs while climbing. Thank you. Thank you, Kaname. Thank you. Thank you. Fuck your egg quests. Palcos are back instead of Shakalakas, which is great. And they actually now have some dialogue in quests. Whether you're hunting with a gun or with a melee weapon, every hunter gets an extra item pouch while they're on a quest, just like in Monster Hunter Portable 3rd. And now, Blade Masters can actually have an additional ammo pouch so that you could carry your friend's extra ammo for you if that's what you wanted to do. You can even use the Street Pass feature on the DS, which will connect you with other hunters, and you can trade palicos, and you can even take their palicos on your quests with you. Canteen ingredients are shared among all the hubs while online, which is really nice, because if you don't have all the ingredients, you can share the ingredients that your friend has if he has more than you. The map got improved, so when you zoom in, things are more detailed and you can see ledges and things to climb. The text itself in the game got a font overhaul, so it's much easier to read. With that, they also changed small things in the UI, like the element of your weapons. In Japanese, it is represented by 1 or 2 characters, so they used icons to represent the element in the Western releases. As it is easier to read and many elements would get confusing with only 1 or 2 letters, this made it much easier to read with a single icon representing an element. There are text options, so you can either leave it on normal or instant. Normal text appears 1 letter at a time, and instant allows players to get through the text a little bit quicker. It all shows up at once, and you press A, and then it skips to the next text box. Also, they gave an option to turn off palico conversations during multiplayer, and they highlighted certain key words, which made it a lot easier for players to skip over generic text and just focus on the important text. Continuing on, let's talk about some larger gameplay changes. So, as I mentioned before, you can now actually mount monsters. So hitting a monster while in the air allows you to build up a certain amount of mounting damage, and once you hit that threshold, your character will hop on the monster and you'll begin a minigame where you can stab the monster and exhaust it, and once you topple that monster, it'll give you a really large opening to get some damage in on the monster. Now, some things you want to know about it is actually hitting the monster while a team member is mounted can result in failing the mount if you stagger the monster. So you want to wait for your team member to finish mounting the monster and topple it until you begin attacking again. You can use this time to sharpen your weapon, heal up, whatever you need to do. There is a new status called the Frenzy Virus. This is only from monsters like Gormagala and the other 2 that are very much like him. We'll talk about them later, but the virus itself is a very strange status because there's nothing quite like it in any of the other games. Once you've been inflicted with the status, there will be a separate bar that will start going up. The only way to decrease that is to take a null berry, and that'll decrease it by about half, and then it'll give you a little bit more time. If that bar completely fills up, then you will receive a debuff. However, if you actually do enough damage before the bar fills up all the way, you can turn the virus around and you'll actually get a buff, and you'll get an attack increase. So a lot of times you can just go into the frenzy virus on purpose as long as you are aggressive enough in the fight, and that debuff will actually turn into a buff and will help you throughout the fight. Something else that they added as far as gameplay changes, this is the first game that you can actually augment your weapons. That's right. We got weapon augmenting in Monster Hunter 4U. So if you verse monsters that have been inflicted with the frenzy virus and are now apex monsters, then you can receive items from them at the end of your quest that you can use to augment your weapons once your weapon is completely leveled up. This gives you a choice between 20 raw attack, 60 armor, or a small life steal effect. I always went with attack. This is the first game that actually started having more characters involved with the story as well, and we got a really great slew of characters in Monster Hunter 4 and 4U. I'm not going to talk about all of them because it's better to just experience them and play through the story yourself, but I'd say the most noteworthy characters are the Ace Hunters. There are 4 of them, and they're just known for being really good at hunting. The Ace Commander, the Ace Cadet, the Ace Gunner, and the Ace Lancer. And you'll go through the story with them, you do a few quests with them, and there is a lot of life in these hunters. There are a lot of other hunters that put in a lot of other work in this universe, and it's nice to see them once in a while. The game introduces 2 new types of quests. Guild quests, which are able to be traded and leveled up. These are actual individual quests that once you get them, they're for specific monsters, and the more you do them, the more they level up. You can also trade quests with other people. It was a really fun aspect and a really interesting way to keep the quests fresh. The higher the level, the better the gear and rewards that you got when completing the quest. The other type of quest was exploration quests, and this always took place in the Everwood map. The map had randomized areas upon each entry, so it's never going to be the same. Each time you load in there, it's going to be different than the time before. Many of the gear obtained in these quests were very unique and even featured some equipment from older games and from monsters that didn't actually appear in Monster Hunter 4U. This was a really fun mode because you never quite knew what you were going to get going in there. You could get some really good gear. Since we were on the topic of the Everwood locale, let's talk about all the locales. We got a bunch of new areas in Monster Hunter 4. The Ancestral Steep, the Primal Forest, Sunken Hollow, Frozen Seaway, Volcanic Hollow, Heaven's Mount, Tower Summit, Everwood, which we discussed, the Great Desert, Sanctuary, Ingle Isle, Speartip Crag, which was just used for the fight against Dalamadur, the Great Sea, the Arena. The arena is like a modernized version of the old arenas. There is even a divider in the middle of the arena. And we got something called the Slay Ground, which was very much like the arena, but for monsters like Quechuacha and Nerscylla, because there is a net for them to climb. There's also a Dragonator in there as well. We got a few new maps for Monster Hunter 4U. We ended up getting a remake of the old desert called the Dunes. We got an area called Battle Quarters, which was more so an updated version of the town map from the old games. It's for monsters like Gogmazios and other really challenging monsters. You'll fight a lot of Elder Dragons here. Battle Quarters came equipped with the Dragonator, ballista turrets, and a newly modified track cannon that can be moved between areas and can actually hold multiple cannonballs at once. We got something called the Polar Field, which was a specific area for fights against monsters like Ykonlos. It's a unique map with only one area. And we got the Castle Charade, an area for just fighting Fatalis and White Fatalis. This is a remake of the original from Monster Hunter on the PS2. Comes with ballistas, cannons, and a Dragonator this time. Those are all the locales. And let's talk about the monsters of the game. Also, new monster types, which is very cool. We got the Snake Wyvern, the Neopterons. No, I don't care about Great Thunderbug or Vespoid Queen. We also got Temnocerons, which are spider-like creatures, and an amphibian. The last type of monster we got is a question mark because it's more of an unknown type of monster and it's more in line with the story, so you're not really supposed to know what it is, which is why they gave it an unknown classification. Monster Hunter 4 also has the most large monsters out of any previous Monster Hunter game. Then, with the G-Rank version of Monster Hunter 4U, we got even more monsters. Okay, let's go over the brand new monsters if you were coming from Monster Hunter 3U and you played all of the past games. What are the brand new monsters for Monster Hunter 4? Let's get into it. The brand new monsters are Ruby Basarios, Orochi Kirin, Molten Tigrex, Quechuacha, Celtis, Celtis Queen, Tetsukabra, Zamtrios, Nerscylla, Najarala, Dalamadur, Daren Moran, the flagship of Monster Hunter 4, Gore Magala, Shigaru Magala. In Monster Hunter 4U, all of the brand new monsters are Shah Dalmador, Ash Quechuacha, Shrouded Nerscylla, Desert Celtis, Desert Celtis Queen, Berserk Tetsukabra, Tidal Najarala, Tiger Stripe Zamtrios, Raging Brachydios, the flagship monster of 4U, Seregios, Gogmazios, and Chaotic Gormagala. Okay, quickly, let's go over a couple more things before we move on to the weapons. We got a couple new items called the Y Stones, which you can unlock at the Wyceum. These stones are specifically built to help you fight and quell the frenzy in monsters, and each stone has different effects: defense up, attack up, elemental damage up, or mind's eye effect. The Wyceum also sells certain items that you can buy with points, like portable steam bomb, dust of life, disposable earplugs, and a couple others. Not only do we get the Wyceum, we also get the Wyporium, one of the best new features in the game, in my opinion. It's essentially your new farm. You can multiply items that you'll need on the quest. Not only can you multiply items, but you can also exchange materials. So things that you don't really need, or things that you want to upgrade into other parts, you can change out for other monster materials that are from monsters not in this game. For instance, you could change a Rothalos shell for a Durambros moss plate, or a Laggy sapphire for a Gravios medulla. You know, there's lots of different options and things that you can get, and it just gives a little bit of a wider variety of weapons and armor in the game. Lastly, with the new Frenzy virus that we got in 4, we also got a new status in 4U. We got the Bleeding status, which was introduced with the brand new flagship Seregios. Bleeding makes it so your character loses health any action it takes. The only way to cure this is to eat meat, like a well-done steak or moss swine jerky. You can also crouch for a little while, but it takes longer than the items. This game really did an awesome overhaul with the weapons in this series. So, to start things off, we actually ended up getting 2 brand new weapons in the 4th generation, and they are the Charge Blade and the Insect Glaive. The Charge Blade was originally called the Charge Axe in Japanese. It was changed because it better represents the gameplay where you typically spend more time in sword and shield mode. The Insect Glaive went through a bit harder time trying to name. They started with the names like Swarm Staff and Ferrocaster, but they were too complicated. Konami wanted something simpler, so they narrowed it down to Insect Staff or Insect Glaive. And since the weapon can cut, Staff just sounds too blunt. The name for the Kinsect came easy, apparently. It was a combination of kinship and insect. All weapons got jumping attacks, which are performed off ledges. So anytime you jump off of a ledge, you can attack in the air, and those are all brand new attacks. All weapons can also do an aerial attack when launched by an upswing from a friend. Lance can actually jump by doing its charge attack and jumping mid-charge attack. So sorry, Insect Glaive, you're not the only weapon that can mount without ledges. Sword and Shield can jump up ledges with a new attack by pressing X and A while facing a ledge. It can also do a dive off of a ledge. The game also had some generic weapon changes, like the longsword red gauge goes back to nothing after the red gauge completely depletes. It also can perform an attack after the Fade Slash with R, so it got some small tweaks. The horn actually has songs that are active slightly longer. The greatsword can follow up with a side swipe after a jumping attack. The sword and shield weapon also got a back hop, which is a really great attack for positioning and for doing damage. I can't get into all the weapon changes because honestly there's just too many, and this video is long enough. But there are a lot of weapon changes and they are very interesting. Well friends, that's it. That's all I got. Let me know if I missed anything about 4 and 4U. Hope you enjoy my little jazz outro. If you did make it this far, be sure to let me know what the very first Monster Hunter game you played was. Alright, my dudes, you have yourself a damn good one. I know I will. Happy hunting. Holy shit. Forgot you can cook so many steaks at once. Nice.